We've got a great author with us today, and you don't want to miss that. His name is Michael Koryta. He's the author of a newly released novel called The Ridge from Little Brown and Company. In fact, it's his third novel that's come out in 12 months. This is unbelievable, and we're going to talk to him about doing 3 novels in 12 months. But in 2008, at the age of 26, Michael Koryta won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Best Mystery Thriller for his novel Envy the Night. And he's won so many other awards, including, among others, St. Martin's Press Best First Novel Prize. The interesting thing is his work has been translated into nearly 20 languages already. This is his 8th book, I believe. I'll confirm that with him. He's a former private investigator and newspaper reporter and graduated from Indiana University with a degree in criminal justice. He currently lives in both St. Petersburg, Florida, and Bloomington, Indiana, and all of this background has certainly helped his writing. Welcome, Michael, back to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me back.
You're very welcome. And you were on my show this year on January 20th of 2011 when we talked about your 2 previous books that had been released. Both of which were called Supernatural Suspense, and they are So Cold the River and Cypress House. And all have come out to rave reviews, and you've been compared to Stephen King. Not a bad comparison. We're going to talk about those books, one of which will soon be a movie. But first, let's start with your brand new book, The Ridge, by giving an overview of the story, Michael.
Okay, thank you. The Ridge actually started with just an image. That was all I had. Tough place to begin from a plot standpoint, but it was the image I had in my head was a lighthouse built in the woods, a rural location, and I just had this image of a lighthouse in the woods and the questions that surrounded that. You know, why someone would build this beacon and how it would be treated by the locals. And I can't tell you exactly how that came to mind, but once I started to play around with that idea, I thought it had great potential for atmosphere.
Sure
and
does.
I ended up pairing that with something taken from real life. In Indiana, there's a place called the Exotic Feline Rescue Center, and this is a rescue preserve that takes tigers, leopards, lions, all sorts of exotic cats from around the country, and it basically just provides them with a safe place to live out the rest of their days. And it's a fascinating mission, and the idea that there's that much of a need for it had always amazed me. So I wanted to write about that, and I ended up pairing the bizarre lighthouse in the woods with the bizarre cats in the woods, and thought I could take that and run with it.
Well, you sure did, at least the finished product. I can imagine, though, I read your acknowledgments in the back of the book, and it looks like you might have had a few little blips along the way, as all writers do, putting things together, but the finished product is really terrific. I told you before you were introduced that the writing is so tight and terrific, and I just think that I love all your books, but I think this one is going to be my favorite. As I said, I read 16 chapters last night, so that tells it. I thought what was fun, too, is that one of the female characters in the book is named Jacqueline. It's not often that I see that name used, because authors usually try to get too clever with names. Do you know someone named Jacqueline, or any reason for picking that what I think is a very beautiful name?
Other than just the pure beauty of the name, no. But I do think it's a beautiful name.
Good.
And it was just, sometimes you struggle a little bit with character names.
Yeah.
Other times they just suggest themselves immediately. And,
yeah.
Jacqueline Mathis was one that, I typed that without any hesitation. She was just there.
Yes. Well, that's what I love about writing and about writers, the things that come to them just as this really weird image of a lighthouse in the woods, and you don't know where it comes from, but there it sits. And clever writer that you are, you did go with it. Now, words like spooky, eerie, tense, chilling have been used to describe your writing, and The Ridge blends crime, horror, ghosts, and but this book takes place in Kentucky. and your two previous works took place in your backyards of Indiana and Florida. So it's a two-part question. Let's start with, first of all, do you consider The Ridge a crossover story for fans of both genres of crime and the supernatural? Some of the reviews of your books have suggested that. And then why Kentucky? I have a pretty good idea why, but let's tell the audience.
Okay, yeah. To answer the first part, I certainly would hope that it would appeal to fans of, both supernatural and horror genres, but also the traditional mystery and crime novel. When I say that, though, it's not a conscious decision as I'm writing to try and create a crossover novel. That's a term that I'm hearing a lot for these recent books. It's not something that really goes through my mind that much.
And that I understand, and that's why I mentioned that it comes from the reviewers that put things on you that it wasn't in your head, as you said when you started it.
Absolutely. And I do understand that as a reviewer, or certainly for the people in marketing, the labels are important. It's frustrating for writers, I think, because labels are sort of our enemy. We just want to tell stories.
Right.
And as far as the Kentucky question is concerned, I wanted to draw from Appalachian folklore for this book, and that region of eastern Kentucky and West Virginia seemed pretty appropriate. And also, I wanted this book to deal with the concept of kind of true evil. And having grown up in Indiana and being a lifelong Indiana basketball fan, there is no better place for true evil than Kentucky. So that was just a natural fit.
Well, and also, I don't know whether the lay of the land in Indiana would be the right place for this, where you had to have something with a lot of woods and spooky on itself. Did that enter into it as well?
The area where the real preserve is in Indiana, my portion of Indiana, southern Indiana, is actually pretty similar in terms of terrain.
I see.
It's not as open farm country as the northern half of the state, so we really do have plenty of spooky woods for it, but I wanted the mountainous region, and we don't have that. So the mining areas and mountains of Kentucky just seemed like a really perfect fit.
Well, it sure reads perfectly when you read the description. Now, I read your blogs, and you mentioned in one of your blogs you have a framed saying that hangs in your home that was given to you when you left the newspaper that you're working with, and it says, quote, "If you're looking for Koryta, he's in the morgue."
Yes, that's right.
And I was pleased to see that there is a reporter in this and the morgue. And when we're talking about the morgue, we're talking about a newspaper morgue,
right?
Specifically, and he spends time in the newspaper morgue. So that was kind of fun to see that. But elaborate upon that a little bit and tell us what it says about your storytelling.
Sure. I would say my storytelling really had its start in the morgue. When I was when I was in high school, I had an internship with the local newspaper where I ended up working, and my first writing duty was to go through the old bound volumes of newspapers and call through those and come up with significant stories that had happened in the same week 25, 50, and 75 years earlier. And then we ran a little column, sort of looking back on this week in local history. And I absolutely loved that task. I loved being around, the old papers and the old stories. And I've always expected that at some point I would write a novel that called upon my roots in journalism. This one is as close as I've gotten. Roy Darmus is probably the I guess I call him the C character, the C story. He's not the lead, but he's the journalist whose small town newspaper has been closed. And I started working on this book around the same time that newspaper staffs around the country were being either slashed or in some cases the paper's closed entirely. I think of the Rocky Mountain News. It was just a tremendous newspaper, and that it's gone now. And so that sort of put the idea in my head of what happens when you remove the journalistic watchdog from the grounds. And I thought that was an interesting question, and so I weaved that into the book as well.
Yeah, that was great. I like the fact too that I was impressed with it that you admit to the fact of remembering the stories that you read in the paper, but not a single reporter's name. So what is the lesson there for reporters out there?
I think the lesson there, and it shouldn't be limited to reporters. I think it's
or writers.
A better novelist, a better lesson for a novelist.
Yeah.
Rather. It's that, the great quote, it's the tale, not he who tells it. And I think, that's one of those things that any writer is well served to remember. Obviously we remember the names of our favorite writers, but really the stories are what stick with us, and you should be focused on the story at all times. And I thought it was interesting as I looked back on some of the newspaper stories that had influenced me. I just could not tell you anyone who wrote them, but I remember the stories and I remember the characters, and I think that is that's the whole idea of what we're trying to do.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I certainly interview a lot of authors, but when I think back, there are many authors whose names that I can't remember. I do remember the story, and then of course some of the most of the outstanding works I do remember. So I think that's all part of it, and I'm glad that you brought that out, because I think it is a good lesson learned. Now we know what inspired. Well, we may not know all of the facts what inspired the story, but you did want to do something about the animals shelter, not shelter, preserve. Is that what they call it? A preserve?
Yeah, a rescue center, a preserve.
Rescue center, yeah. And we want to get back to that, but and we may have to cut to commercial. But was there another event that prompted the story? I know you had the image of the lighthouse, and then you thought about the preserve. Was there anything else in terms of reading what was going on in the world with the cats and so forth that prompted this to develop?
No, it really it came from just a fascination with the mission that Joe Taft and the Rescue Center are involved with every day. The idea that there is such need for a place like this just fascinated me. I think most of us would never consider just how much of a problem exotic species are in this country. The idea that 26 cats would need to be rescued from absolutely deplorable conditions at a farm in Ohio, for example, which is one of Joe's recent rescues. That sort of things fascinates me. I'm always looking for the great untold story that's right under our nose, and this struck me as one of those.
Now we're going to switch to something else, and Michael, we're going to start chatting a little bit now about Cypress House, your previous book. I want to mention again that this is the third novel of his that's come out within the last year. There's some kind of record there, I know that.
There's some exhaustion, at least.
Exhaustion is right. I mean, I can't believe it. But you did sell the movie rights for it. So let's tell the audience, what is the storyline on Cypress House?
The Cypress House is set during the Depression in Florida on the Gulf Coast, and set around the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, which is one of the only Category 5 hurricanes that ever made landfall on the continental U.S. And it's sort of a blend of a gangster story, and also there's a supernatural thread to it. The main character, Arlen Wagner, has premonitions of death for people who were traveling with him, and those premonitions dated back to his experiences in World War I.
Yeah, that was a wild storyline. I mean, to start off being interested in this hurricane that hit, and go from there to what you did was really amazing. I think that'll make a terrific movie. So, pardon me. Let's talk about the movie now. Chris Columbus and 1492 Pictures have acquired the rights. So why don't we start out by giving some background on Columbus, who's going to do the adaptation, and his production partner, Mark Radcliffe. What can you tell us about them?
Well, I'm thrilled to be working with Chris. He directed the first two Harry Potter films, so he's done pretty well at the box office. He was really known as I would say the sort of comedy king of the late 80s and early 90s. He did films like the Home Alone movies, Mrs. Doubtfire.
Two of my favorites. I think two of everybody's favorites.
Exactly. So he started in the comedy genre, and then moved on to the supernatural with the Harry Potter adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
And last year did Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. So he's got just an incredible record of success, and I had the chance to come out and sit down with him for a while before they acquired the rights, and I could not have been more impressed with him as a person. Very humble, low-key guy, and just the enthusiasm he has for storytelling is really, it's exactly what you want to see when you're talking to someone about possibly adapting.
Well, I bet, especially for a writer who, I mean, this is your baby. It's your story, and to have a connection with the person that's going to be doing it is great. I want to mention too that Columbus and 1492 Pictures recently produced the screen adaptation of the best-selling book The Help. And that's out and about in a few places now, I believe.
I think it's nationwide in July or August, as far as I know. But
yeah, so I imagine you are exciting. Now, what phase is it at right now?
Well, it's very early. But Chris has a draft of this. Actually, it's the third draft of the script done. I just had the chance to read that, and I thought it was great. I'm the farthest thing from an impartial judge of the material. Obviously, I'm very close to it, but I thought he did a wonderful job. It's very faithful to the book, but he made, I thought, just all of the right decisions in terms of editing for time and the changes you would need to make to have it fit the 2-hour sort of cinema standard time frame. I think he's making really good choices on that. He's a very visual writer, and obviously this is a story that I've spent a lot of time picturing already, so it should be vivid to me. But as I read through what he's doing visually, I felt like it could be a very very intense.
Oh, I agree with that, Michael. My goodness, just the idea of the hurricane, and I'm sure they're going to get into some of that, aren't they?
And
what he's
done with those.
Right, and then the train, and definitely a lot of great visuals that the reader thinks about as they're reading the book. And I think it's great that he gave you the script, because many times that doesn't happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was very impressed that he wanted to share it early, and I was a little hesitant. He asked for feedback, and I was a little hesitant to offer feedback to the director who's been so accomplished for so long. But
I bet
he took all of my notes, with real interest, and he's been a wonderful guy to work with. And that he really does seem interested in not just remaining faithful to the book, but in explaining the changes that he's making and why he's making them.
Right.
And he's under no obligation to, explain a word of what
That's
he does.
right.
So I'm deeply impressed by the way he's handled that.
I think you've got a pretty good idea how fortunate you are to be working with someone like that is willing to do that, because that doesn't happen
Absolutely.
a lot. This is a Jacqueline Bachar show. I am talking to writer Michael Koryta about, first of all, his new novel, but right now we're talking about Cypress House, previous novel, and the fact that it's going to be we hope, turned into a movie. Has any casting been done yet on that, or any talk of?
Not that's involved me. I think it's too early in the game for casting. I'm sure they have ideas of people they'd like to see in different roles, but that'll be Chris and Michael Barnathan and Mark Radcliffe working on that end. I don't think I'll send any emails out with suggested cast members.
I was going to say, well, it's your book, and I mean, now that it's being made into a movie, do you have any picture in your head of who you think might be good in it? Or
I told Chris I wanted Humphrey Bogart.
Oh,
but I hear he's available. So
well,
beyond that, I'll trust their judgment.
You write the supernatural, you could get him in there somehow. But okay, so we want a Humphrey Bogart-like guy to play in this. Well, the fact that it is your third novel in 12 months is really amazing. But first of all, what are your hopes for the movie? Now, we already know that you're happy with the way that it's going, but it's a long way off from actually being done. What are your hopes for the movie version of your previous novel, Cypress House? Got any wishes?
My hope would just be that Chris has a chance to make it and actually get it through.
Yeah.
Onto the screen, because there are a lot of hurdles there. Lots of books are optioned, lots of scripts are written, and various things happen, and they never make their way.
Yeah, and this could be an expensive movie to make with all of. Although I know I'm going to take that back. I mean, so much is being done on the computer now. All of the things,
the effects of the
right.
That spectrum has changed so rapidly.
Sure, the hurricane, the train, all of that. So I guess we shouldn't even go there. Well, you've been compared to Stephen King. Not only that, but you've received accolades from such great writers and a couple of whom I've had the pleasure to have on my show, like Michael Connelly. He's a great interviewee and a great guy and a good writer.
And great person. Absolutely.
Dean Koontz, Dennis Lehane, certainly I've had on my show and had the pleasure of meeting him in person. He was here to do a presentation. And Michael Connelly says, quote, "You are one of the best." Now, how does it feel to be compared to Stephen King and then to hear all of these wonderful things being said about you?
Deeply humbling.
Is it?
That's about, that's all I can say there. I don't, you can't worry about those sort of comparisons when you're writing, but you certainly hope that people are enjoying the books enough to rank you with other favorite writers. Mr. King actually chimed in himself, which meant a great deal to me. He's been a huge influence, particularly with these last few books, the supernatural books, and he picked The Cypress House as a recommended summer read in Entertainment Weekly, which was that was just a huge thrill for me. And likewise with the nice comments from Dean Koontz and Michael Connelly and Dennis Lehane. I mean, these are all.
Oh yes.
These people are the reason that I write. So it's always it means a lot. It means more than I can accurately put into words.
I'm sure. And now this is your 8th novel, and but you're not even 30 yet, are you, Michael?
I'm 28. I've got 8 at 28. Yeah.
Wow, 8 at 28. That is really incredible. But you've got a lot of experience behind you. You've got a lot of journalism behind you also, and I'm sure that that's showing in all of your work. But at the young age of 26, and like you say, 28, and you feel humbled by all of these accolades. Does it put any additional pressure on you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it does to an extent. Most of that is self-inflicted. It doesn't come from the comparison so much as a desire to measure up to all of the great writers who inspired me to do this sort of thing at the beginning. But in terms of being compared to those great writers and getting good reviews here and there, that I don't think that adds any additional pressure. I think that's more internal
Yeah. I sure hope it doesn't affect your writing because I'm sure that it can happen, especially at a young age. You're gaining both success and fame. Are there any pitfalls that you want to avoid?
The ones you just mentioned. Yeah, I hope that it doesn't infect the writing. And
Yeah.
I don't think that would be a problem. The place where all of that disappears for me is when I get into the story. I kind of crawl into the book, and all of the business side of things disappears at that moment. So I can't imagine it would affect the writing. I certainly hope not. I think the concerns the only concerns that I have are really more on the level of time management. Book tours, travel, things like that make it a little bit more difficult on the writing side. So learning how to do what Michael Connolly's been doing successfully for 15 years.
That's right.
Is a challenge.
But certainly to keep up that pace of 3 books coming out in 12 months.
Yeah, that's not a pace I'll be keeping up.
Yeah.
And a lot of the credit there goes to Little Brown. They had a plan that they wanted to release these books quickly, so they crunched
and that was good that they did.
Schedule. But they didn't ask me to write at any sort of frenetic pace, so that was really more on the production end that they were able to do that.
Well, that's good. Now you're finishing a book tour, but since you mentioned the book tour, I do want to mention to those that are listening in on the website, which is kptr1450.com, that you in Phoenix, that you are going to be in Phoenix, Arizona, on June 25th for the Poisoned Pen Conference. That sounds like a lot of fun. Are there going to be a lot of mystery writers and what have you there?
It's a great event. The Poisoned Pen is an independent bookstore in Scottsdale, and it's one of the absolute best bookstores in the country. And Barbara Peters, who owns the store, is one of the just really great champions of writers, and can't say enough about what she's done as a bookseller. But they're
which is tough to do with all the bookstores that are closing and everything. So
absolutely.
That's good. Any of the ones we've named going to be there? Do you think?
I'm not sure of the full list. I know one of my favorite writers will be out there, Alifair Burke.
Oh, yeah.
Who has a new book out that's just excellent called Long Gone, and that releases June 21st. So.
Well, I'm sure you're going to enjoy that one, and of course it can still be a little warm there, but...
I was out there last week, actually.
Were you?
It was 102, and I think it's only going up. So.
Well, Michael, we are out of time, and I know you're going to continue to do great, and I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.